Imperial yeast is at it again with their Imperialis project, creating yet another unique proprietary strain through the hybridization of two other yeasts. In addition to its excellent attenuation and rapid reduction of diacetyl, I-10 Mangostini contributes robust, ripe tropical fruit, strawberry, and lychee notes to beer that complement modern hops. And as a Kveik hybrid, it can be fermented anywhere from 78 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 26 to 32 degrees Celsius without issue. Head over to imperialyeast.com to learn more about I-10 Mangostini and be sure to pick some up for your next batch of fruity IPA. Hey everybody, this is the Brülosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and we are doing something a little bit different this week. This is episode 298, which means our 300th episode is right around the corner. As all of our regular listeners know, every 10th episode of this show is a Brü A, where we answer a handful of questions that listeners have submitted over, the last 10 episodes or so. Now, seeing as we started this series early on, episode 300 should be our 30th Brü A. However, we opted to do something fun with Jersey and Tim to celebrate our 100th episode, which put us behind by one episode since that point. Now, why does this matter? Well, it really doesn't, but as anyone who knows me can attest, I'm pretty neurotic, and not having that 30th Brü A line up with episode 300 just kind of hurts my brain. The fix? We're just going to throw in an extra Brü A into the mix. Why not, right? Today, I'm joined by contributor Will Lovell to answer some questions submitted by listeners of the show.
Yeah, I'm really excited to get on here and dive into these questions. I think the Brü A episodes are some of my favorites just because they go all around the spectrum, and it's really cool to see what you guys are interested in finding out about.
Yeah, and one of the reasons I'm comfortable doing this, I'm not usually one who likes to break stride or go away from what's expected of us, but we get a lot of really positive feedback on our Brü A episodes. So I'm trusting that our listeners aren't going to be too bothered by this. Now, as I mentioned, our 300th episode is just a couple weeks away, and it too is going to be a Brü A. That's how we're going to catch up with ourselves. But to keep things fresh and interesting, we'll only be answering questions submitted by our patrons on that episode. And I'm telling you, some of them took our request to ask us anything pretty seriously. So that should be a lot of fun. It's just another benefit of being a patron of Brülosophy. What is a patron, you ask? Well, allow me to tell you. Patrons are those fans of Brülosophy who appreciate what we're doing enough to toss a few bucks or quid or whatever it is you call your currency our way every month at patreon.com/Brülosophy as a way to support our efforts. As much as we love producing the content we do, it does not come cheap. And while we appreciate our sponsors immensely, I mean it when I say that we would not be here today if it weren't for our patrons. That's just the hard fact. If you listen to this podcast, if you like the Brü Lab podcast, if you get anything out of the articles we publish at Brülosophy.com, or if you enjoy watching the Brülosophy show on YouTube, you have our patrons to thank for that. It's because of that relatively small segment of people who read, listen, and watch to the stuff that we produce that everybody else gets to do the same thing for free. That's just the simple truth. So if you have any desire at all to join this badass group of fans, all you have to do is make a pledge over at patreon.com/Brülosophy. And once you do, you'll not only get the satisfaction of knowing you're doing your part to keep us around, but we'll hook you up with some pretty cool rewards like access to unpublished contributor recipes, unique discounts at YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invite to a monthly live Q&A session with somebody in the brewing world. This month's guest is one of the best looking brewers I know, Brülosophy's very own Will Lovell, who in addition to having ample brewing experience and being an integral part of our crew, is on the leadership team for the Brew Club. He's also co-hosting this episode with me today. Will, how are you feeling about this upcoming session?
I'm feeling really excited. People that are able to join the video will see my muy guapo beard, and so it'll be pretty awesome.
That's what I mean by so good looking, Will. And these sessions are fairly, I don't want to, use this term too awkwardly for you, but they're pretty intimate. They tend to yield, 5 to 15 viewers, people asking questions. So if you ask questions, they're going to get asked. You're also just learning from people who have a lot of experience in brewing. So for those listening to this show, the week it came out, you still have some time to get in on this live Q&A Q&A session with Will, all you need to do is make your pledge of $3 or more at patreon.com/Brulosophy by Friday, August 25th, 2023, as Will's going to be taking questions this Saturday, the 26th. All past sessions are available on our private Patreon and Facebook pages, so you can go back and watch them whenever you like. Learn more about becoming a patron over at patreon.com/Brulosophy. Another very easy way to support us is by using the links found at brulosophy.com/support when you're shopping online. Your shopping experience doesn't change at all, and we get a little kickback for the referral. It's nothing going to make us rich, but it does help us to support this show. Finally, if you wouldn't mind, please take a few seconds to leave a rating and review of this show in Apple Podcast or wherever it is you listen to your podcasts, as doing so increases our visibility, which makes it easier for those who may not have heard of us yet to find us. All right, feedback is brought to you by Clawhammer Supply, who are known for their incredible all-in-one electric brewing systems. I've brewed on both their 120 and 240 volt systems, and I'm telling you, these things are legit, efficient, easy to use with a relatively small footprint. You're not going to be disappointed with one of these units. Plus, the guys behind the company run an amazing YouTube channel, which you can find by searching YouTube for Clawhammer Supply. If you're in the market for electric brewing gear or even just reasonably priced kettles and such, make sure to check out what Clawhammer Supply has to offer at clawhammersupply.com, and don't forget to let them know Brulosophy sent you when you're checking out. That's clawhammersupply.com. Listener Barry Cranston wrote in with a comment on the whole brewing as science and or art thing. Barry said, I believe brewing is a craft that uses science and art like all crafts. For example, cooking, baking, woodwork, metalwork, masonry, and so on. Big beer relies more on science, while smaller independent breweries might rely more on art. The home brewer is the same as the home cook, baker, welder, etc. The science and art are used as tools to achieve the results that are desired. Practice, experience, and gaining of knowledge enhance the craft of brewing. Science and art are fundamental to this craft, but they are means rather than ends or objectives. So I think both art and science are essential parts of brewing, but the craft comes with the experience and use of both in brewing beers over the years. Just my thoughts after brewing for more than 25 years. Will, what do you think?
I really like the analogy of cooking. So when I think of like cooking and science, I think a lot about barbecue. And so there is this point where a temperature fat starts to render, and that moistness of that fat starts to permeate inside of the meat. And so you get kind of that tenderness and juiciness from this fat inside of like a brisket rendering out. And while you don't have to have the knowledge of what temperature points fat rendering happens, you could really just get by with a thermometer and know that at about 195 to 200 degrees, when you can start poking it in there and it's really soft, that it's done. You don't have to have that knowledge. It is very helpful when you're trying to think about processes and things as well. So yeah, I do think I like the cooking analogy a lot.
Yeah, I agree. And Barry, I like the cut of your jib, man. I think my thoughts on the matter are pretty well aligned with yours. Brewing is both art and science. That's kind of the take that I've been going with this whole time. And they are necessarily linked. You can't have one without the other. I think if you do, I can't imagine what it would look like if that were the case anyways. Maybe just ChatGPT or something. Who knows? But I'm still bemused by the response that episode has yielded from listeners. I mean, we're still getting feedback on it after a couple of months. And it's just, it's hard for me to predict what's going to, connect with people. So anyways, thank you so much for hitting us up, Barry. We appreciate you reaching out. If you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brulosophy.com or leave us a note on social media. All right, when we're back from this break, answers to your questions. There's no denying that stainless steel is the best material for brewing equipment, and Delta Brewing Systems offers some of the lowest prices on high-quality stainless gear, like the Firm Tank, which in addition to holding 8 gallons or 30 liters of wort, comes with a domed lid to even further reduce the chances of a messy blow-off. Plus, it can hold up to 4 psi of pressure for closed transfers. Delta Brewing Systems also has their own line of brew kettles, as well as one of the lowest-priced all-in-one electric brewing systems out there, and their prices are shockingly low. If you're in the market for legit stainless gear that won't break the bank, do yourself a favor and head over to deltabrewingsystems.com today. Chilling work can be a chore, especially after a long brew day, but not with the Exchillerator Counterflow Chiller, which can chill a 5-gallon or 19-liter batch of wort in 5 minutes or less, leading to a strong cold break and clear wort in the fermenter. Brulosophy's Matt Del Fiacco uses the Exchillerator Max and absolutely loves it. In addition to improved chilling efficiency, every Exchillerator comes with a 5-year warranty that covers the entire chiller for manufacturer defects. If you're looking to up your chilling game and a CFC is right for you, head over to exchillerator.com today. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. Massive thanks to all of the listeners who sent in their questions. Our list continues to grow, so if you emailed us and don't hear a response to your question today, chances are we will in a future Brü A episode. Now, it will not be on episode 300 because, unless you're a patron, of course, because that one is going to be dedicated to just questions our patrons asked. All right, first up, in fact, this is a double question from Brad Jennings, who I believe is a local brewer to me, and also a patron, if I'm not mistaken, who asked this question a while back. It's been on the list for a while. First question Brad asked is, I've listened to every Brewlosophy episode, every Brew Lab episode, and every Late Edition episode. Late Edition is Yakima Valley Hops podcast. What other brewing podcasts do you recommend? Will, I'm going to toss that one to you first. What other brewing podcasts do you listen to and recommend that others listen to?
So first off, I really love what we have to offer. I just more recently listened to the Brew Lab episode where Kate and Jordan were reviewing non-alcoholic beers and the processes used to make them, which was even for a guy that doesn't brew NA beers, I found that really fascinating. So way to go, guys. That's pretty awesome stuff. But the other one I listen to probably more than others is the kind of the OG basic brewing radio. Jay Sensor puts me in a happy place with just the sound of his voice. Some other ones, if you check out the Beersmith podcast, it's really informative, but I really have to be interested in that topic because they are pretty technical. And then Brew Strong has some pretty cool opportunities as well. Where else are you going to get Jameel and Scott Janish talking on the same podcast very often?
Yeah, well, and of course our friend John Palmer, who's the co-host with Jameel on Brew Strong. That's one I would highly recommend. I have a feeling most people out there are familiar, at least, with the majority of the Brewing Network podcast, which the Brew Strong is on. I also love Dr. Homebrew. For better or for worse, I think JP is a good guy, and I love listening to him dig into homebrewed beers with his co-hosts on that. So that's a fun one. But I'm with you. My favorite brewing podcast, and I don't want to sound too haughty, so I'm going to put this one above our own, is Basic Brewing Radio. Steve Wilkes and James Spencer, like you, put me in a happy place. When I hear their voices, I just feel calm, and I love their whimsy. The jokes that they make get me, so I laugh at them, and to me, it's a lot of fun. I also I think the Master, I believe it's Master Homebrewers podcast or something like that. That's a really informative one. If you're looking to learn more about beer styles and brewing in general, that's another very informative one. I've heard a lot of crossover. We've received a lot of comments from people who view what we do and what they're doing, the Master Brewers podcast, as being kind of like a crossover. There's a lot of information that we kind of share in the way that we approach things. So if you like what we're doing, you're probably going to like what they're doing as well. So those are the ones I would recommend. If you're not listening to Basic Brewing Radio, come on, get it together. That's some good stuff. They're one of the older brewing podcasts out there as well. So Brad also asked, what do you suggest for big beers where the grain bills are too big for your setup? For example, I have an Anvil 10.5 gallon and it maxes out at 16 pounds of grain. I wanted to do a Russian Imperial Stout, but the grain bills are upwards of 20 plus pounds, at least the ones I have found. This is a great question.
So I feel your pain so hard, man. So I have 2 Delta all-in-one electrics. I think my max grain bill is a little bit bigger than 16. I can't remember off the top of my head. But just remember, when it says 16 pounds, your efficiency is going to tank so hard due to the compaction of the grain bill at that size. And so it gets really hard even to push 16 pounds. But I like to brew triples and quads from time to time. And so there's a couple of methods I've tried. The first one is the one that I do most often is I'll typically make an all grain recipe, and then I will do something like take extra light Pilsen dry malt extract, and I will kind of reduce some base malt and sub in, 2 to 3 pounds of DME. And so that'll usually put me in like a 10 to 12 pound grain bill with, 2-3 pounds DME. And that's kind of a 10 to 12 pounds I find is a really sweet spot in efficiency for my systems.
Yeah.
And that saves a lot of time and energy. And if you're doing something big, I don't think you're really going to notice too much of a flavor difference. And then the other thing that I've tried a couple of times is reiterated mashing. And reiterated mashing is basically where you split your grain bill in some kind of half. So if it's like a 18 pound grain bill, maybe you do 12 pounds in your first mash and then, however many is left over in your second. But, you'll do one mash like normal, and then you will do the second mash with your other grains, where you use your wort as your hot liquor. Now, Chris Kobe has a lot of information on this topic. If you go to like Beer and Garden Journal, he has a whole write-up on it, and he does a really good job of explaining it, probably better than I can. But to be fair, the couple of times I've tried it, it took a really long time because you're doing 2 mashes instead of 1. I still didn't hit my numbers, so I still ended up adding DME anyways to get to my pre-boil gravity. And so I'm sure you can hone your process if you want to do it, but I'm lazy, and DME seems like a quick fix. And I don't think you're going to notice 2-3 pounds of DME in a quad or a stout or something like that.
No, I mean, I would highly recommend, if you're going to go that route, to use the palest dry malt extract DME possible. I've made some 100% DME beers that I finally got to the point of thinking, man, I don't taste this as being extract. I do not like liquid malt extract. It's funny, when I started brewing, like DME was the cheap stuff. You wanted to get that good liquid stuff. And now I'm pretty convinced that the quote homebrew flavor comes from liquid malt extract oftentimes. And so I stay away from that stuff as much as possible. What I do is completely different than what you recommended, Will. I just brew smaller batches. So if I'm making I've done this many times, and I've got the same struggle, Brad. I've got a 10 gallon SS Brewtech electric system. So you can only fit so much grains in there anyways. All I do is I'll cut the batch size down to 3 gallons instead of 5. And I'm pretty happy with that, because usually when you're making a 10+% ABV beer, it's not like you're drinking it the same way you would, a 4.5% Pilsner. So I'm fine with the total yield by cutting that in half, and it doesn't really change your brew day much. Still, though, like you said, Will, when I'm doing that, and the times that I've done that, there have been a few. I think I made a triple IPA one time, or whatever people are calling that nowadays, where I didn't quite hit my numbers, and so I bumped up the OG by adding just table sugar. I added some sucrose to the boiling wort until I hit my OG, and I just kind of went from there. Now that works particularly well on styles that you want to be drier, and for the that aren't going to cover up any other flavor contributions from malt extract or anything like that. So plain sugar works just as well. I've known people who with Belgian beers will use something like maple syrup, or they add brown sugar, turbinado sugar. These are all ways to bump up your ABV without having to use more grains. So those are options for you as well. But my recommendation is just cut your batch size down by 3 gallons, and you don't really have to screw with any extras for the most part, at least.
All right. Well, the next question comes from Eddie Adams, and he says, I've been considering doing a mango IPA with freeze-dried mango due to liquid conservation in relation to the ratio to raw mango. Messing around on Amazon, I stumbled upon Mangosteen. I looked up the character and was pretty amazed at what I found. I looked it up to see if this has already hit the IPA scene, as it seems it would be an obvious choice. And I was highly surprised to see there's really not a lot out there, and it's relatively new to the scene. Have any of the Brewlosophy contributors researched or brewed with Mangosteen? I'm considering using Terrasul Superfoods Mangosteen powder on a 5-gallon batch using DME with Amarillo, Citra, Centennial, and Cascade.
So I have not used Mangosteeny. I believe they put an I at the end of it from Imperial Yeast. This is one of I think it's the newest in their line of Imperialis strains, as they refer to them. It is a summer seasonal, if I recall correctly, so you may not be able to get it throughout the year, though. If it's popular enough, they may make it a normal offering. Mangosteeny was developed by, I believe what they do is they breed 2 other strains, 2 of their common or more popular strains together. One usually, and I'm sure this is true for Mangosteeny, One that's a Kvike strain, and then one that's like something like Juice or, one of their regular ale strains. And the offspring are what we're calling, in this case, Mangostini, and which is known to produce just gnarly, fruity characteristics. Now, I've had a handful of beers, in fact, that have been fermented with L10 Mangostini, but I've never made one. These beers are really good. They do exactly what Imperial claims, which sometimes that's not the case with yeast. I don't always get for example, the super ester stuff from Pub. I don't always get the cleanest thing from AO7 Flagship. But with Mangostini, it is fruity. I'm telling you, and to me, it's a unique fruity thing because it's more than just the tropical stuff that everybody's looking for. But you also get some like I don't know, they call it Mangostini for a reason, but it's like a peachy type of thing. And when you blend that with hops like Eddie referred to here, I mean, Amarillo, Citrus, Centennial, Cascade, it really amplifies, in my experience again, amplifies that fruity characteristic. Now, I want to touch on your proposed use of freeze-dried mango. I don't see any issues with that. And I think your reasoning there is good, is that they've removed all the liquid so it concentrates that mango flavor. You have to keep in mind though, mangosteen is not a mango. My understanding, I've had mangosteen and they don't taste like mangoes. So that being said, I don't think you're going to get a very strong, overwhelming mangosteen or mango flavor from Mangostini yeast. I just think that's the fun name that they went with because it has qualities that are similar to those kind of tropical flavors. But I think it's a great idea. And if you have access to Mangostini, there's no reason you shouldn't try it. Again, I haven't used it myself, but I've had multiple beers that have been made with it, and it does what it claims. It is very, very fruity.
So I didn't interpret this particular question to be as much about Mangostini, the yeast, as much as mangosteen powder from the fruit itself. And so,
is he not talking about mangosteen? Oh, he's talking about mangosteen powder. Well, there you go. I just did a free ad for Mangostini yeast there. I'll respond to the mangosteen powder later.
so essentially, like I read this question and I initially thought what you thought. I'm like, oh, Mangostini, cool. Like I haven't had a chance to use this yeast, but I really want to. But then I saw the powder at the end and I saw that he was messing around on Amazon. I'm like, oh, well, he's wanting to use mangosteen powder, which, again, when I Google around, I can't find much of the way in usage of mangosteen powder in an IPA, and I don't have any, personal experience with using mangosteen or freeze-dried mangoes for that matter in a hazy, but I do like where your head is at, because I think using 5 gallons of DME that we just talked about for a little bit in the previous question is a really easy way to start playing around with some of these different flavor profiles, because you're not going to have a lot of time invested from a DME batch with just some Amarillo, Citrus, Centennial, and Cascade. You could literally just get that wort hot, split it into 2.5 gallon batches, and then you could have your freeze-dried mango in one, your mangosteen powder in the other, and kind of do a side-by-side to see which one you prefer. And I really like your methodology here.
Yeah, I'm an idiot. So I agree 100% with you, Will, that I would split it up and give a taste test, sample both side by side. I think freeze-dried mango, again, we can only presume on this because I've never used it, but I think freeze-dried mango is probably going to get you more of that kind of traditional, or what we've come to expect from that tropical fruit mango flavor. Mangosteen powder, I don't know why it wouldn't work. I mean, if you taste the powder and it tastes like mangosteen, then adding it to beer should impart that flavor to the beer as well. But if you ferment it with mangostini, you may really amplify those flavors. So give that a shot.
Okay. I still love you, Marshall. It's okay, buddy. It's all right.
Oh my God. I was so far off. God, I didn't even drink last night either, man. I took it easy because I knew we'd be doing this today, and I still screwed it up. But Eddie, I hope we answered your question adequately there. Try both, man. I really like the idea of one of the only real fruit flavors that I've liked in IPA so far has been mango. I'm not a big fan of mangosteen flavor. The times that I've tried the actual fruit, I don't like it very much. I love mango, and to me, it just melds so well with the more tropical fruit flavors that we get from some modern hops, particularly things like Citra or Galaxy. Some of the more hot hops of the day. So give that a go. I'd be really excited to hear how it turns out for you. All right, the next question comes from Ben Gansmer. He's a Brew Club member, one of our strong competitors actually in the Brew Club, who competes a lot and does really well in competition. Ben says, you're always asking for non-brewing related questions, so here you go. What is your favorite way to make pizza What are your favorite pizza toppings? And also, does pineapple belong on pizza? Will, you better answer these properly, pal.
So first off, Ben's awesome. I remember him explaining to half of the brew club one time how the inner tap counter pressure fillers work, and how half of us had the PRV valve flipped the wrong way with the little spring inside. So Ben's awesome and a very, very smart guy. But so my favorite way to make a pizza is on a real fire, kind of like a wood fired thing. But I don't have that kind of pizza oven. But what I do have is it's the Costco Louisiana Grill's Kamado grill, and it's really, it's kind of the big green egg knockoff, and it has like, I like those because you can do smoking brisket on it, low and slow, like 225, 250, or you can knock it all the way up to like 500, 600 degrees and cook pizza on these suckers. And so I love that subtle smoke you get from doing like a pizza on a grill with like a pizza peel or some kind of stone underneath it to get that nice crust along the bottom of it. And I think some of my favorite toppings that we've done is I love like prosciutto with fresh arugula. And I'll make my own pizza sauce, and then we'll do prosciutto on top and then add arugula on it. I also like bacon and caramelized onions on things as well. Anytime I can put caramelized onions on anything, it's a good day. And as for pineapple, I do think pineapple is good on pizza, but I prefer pepperoni and pineapple because you get that spicy sweet thing happening. And to me, that's a better flavor combo.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you about the pineapple thing. I'm just going to hit it hard out of the park here. First off, I love pineapple on pizza. Growing up, Hawaiian was my favorite. As an adult, I agree that I like pepperoni better than Canadian bacon, and I also like pickled jalapenos on my pineapple. Yeah, because it adds that spice. You get that sweet spice, that nice juicy thing. Here's what I don't understand, and this kind of goes along with a lot of the stuff we talk about in brewing. Why the hell do people care if you like pineapple on your pizza or not? If you don't like it, pick it off. That's what I tell my kids. If it's not for you, just pick it off. You don't have to mention it, okay? So I don't get why people care if others like pineapple on their pizza. I think it's just a fun thing for people to, jokingly complain about. So I love it. In fact, we just made pizza this weekend. On Friday night, we had our neighbors over. Tim and Craig from the beer review episodes. So they came over and I think I made 12 pizzas. I always make my own crust. Do you make your own crust, Will, when you're making pizza?
So my wife has this my wife and I multitask. So I make the sauce and then she makes the crust, and she has this homemade olive oil dough that she makes and we'll roll out. And that's what we use.
Oh, that sounds so good. A friend of ours, one of the ones who was over actually on Friday night, Gail, that's Craig's wife. They do their last name is Fry. And so every year during, I think it's late fall or early winter, they do what they call pies with the fries at their place. And she has a crust that I believe has a pretty decent amount of olive oil in it. I usually just go with a classic Neapolitan crust, which is basically just flour, salt, maybe a little bit of olive oil, but usually I leave that out, and yeast. The approach that I typically take is I'll proof that whole batch of it, and I'm going pretty big because we usually do pizzas when we have friends over. I'll let that proof on the counter for maybe, 5-6 hours. And then I ball it out and put them into separate bowls. And then I'll throw those in the fridge and let them stay overnight to kind of cold ferment. Sometimes if I'm in a rush, I'll just leave them on the counter until it's time to cook the pizzas. So that's how I do my dough. It's pretty easy. You can use pizzacreator.net, and they have a whole variety of different types of pizza doughs. If you're into pizza, try all of those. I feel like there's like a cool kids club who only like Neapolitan crust. I've tried a few and my family's like, dude, this other one's way better. Just do what you like. Same thing with the pineapple on the pizza thing. When I started making pizza, I did it on my grill, and I specifically bought a propane grill that had the back burner for rotisserie. And so I would crank everything all the way up, including that back burner, and put a pizza stone on there. And I forget what this type of stone it is, but it is not your classic round pizza stones. Apparently those can break in super high heat. It's a different type of stone, and mine's a rectangle. They cost like $25 on Amazon. I'd throw that in there and I'd let it preheat for a good 45 minutes before even making the first pie. And then, so once that's nice and hot, so that as soon as you slide that pizza on there, you're getting that nice cook on the crust. I'm tossing it in with a peel, closing it, and every 10 to 15 seconds, I'm just kind of twisting it, spinning it a little bit so that it gets a nice even cook from the back burner. And it takes about a minute. at most usually, and then I pull it off and it's done, and it's pretty awesome. I like some classic pizza styles. I've got 3 kids who all just want cheese or pepperoni or Hawaiian, so we usually do those. One of the favorites, a family favorite, is barbecue chicken pizza, and so I no longer use that grill. I got a pellet smoker a couple years ago that I use for everything now, and I did one pizza night using that. It was a little bit more difficult. It doesn't have the back burner, and it's a little more difficult to, I guess, monitor the temperature of what the stone is going to be. But it turned out some really great tasting pizza. Again, that just slight touch of smoky flavor really, I think, adds a lot to the pizza itself. It adds another dimension that just makes it taste really good, in my opinion. But for Father's Day this year, my wife got me an off-brand, I forget what brand it is, but an off-brand of like one of those uni pizza oven things. And that's why we actually did our pizza party on Friday night. It was my breaking in. We just got done with all of our summer travels. So I broke in this pizza oven thing, and it is pretty legit. It's a lot of fun to use. You kind of feel like you're in an actual like pizza parlor cooking on this thing. It works really great. Again, it only takes like, I don't know, a minute and a half per pie for it to be done. And they come out tasting really, really nice. Again, you got to preheat it because it's got a stone in there. You want that stone to be really hot. My favorite toppings are, I'm a weirdo. The first pizza that I make whenever we're doing a pizza party is just dough, olive oil, salt. I do like flaky salt, fresh ground cracked pepper, and garlic powder. And then I throw that in, and it's just kind of this basic flavored bread that really allows you to taste the dough. But I love it so much. We have here in the valley where I live, Fresno, we've got a lot of olive farms. We produce a lot of olives in this area. And so we get, we can have local olive oil and stuff like that. It's just a lot of fun. So those are my favorite toppings. Again, I love pineapple. I actually cut up a whole fresh pineapple just for our pizza party on Friday night, and we put it on most of the pizzas we made that night. So that's my answer.
So our kid's favorite is when we just, the first one we normally make is just like, we'll take garlic butter. So just nothing too complicated, just like garlic powder and melted butter. And then we'll brush it on top of the pizza dough and just make like cheese sticks. And our kids just like, they love that because like fresh pizza dough with a little bit of garlic butter and some cheese and then maybe some parsley on top, and like, they're chowing down on that, and that's what they want to eat is like cheese because it's super basic.
Exactly.
And so we do that and appease the masses, and then we go off and start doing some fun funky stuff because we'll usually buy whatever at the grocery store. So that's awesome.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, obviously we could probably do a whole episode just on making pizza alone. There's so much stuff that we're not talking about here, but one of my other favorites, again, I'm all about basic. It's the same with beer. I love basic pale lagers with, there's something about that I just really enjoy. Your classic margarita pizza with just fresh tomatoes, basil. We always have a basil plant in our kitchen that we use for various things, and buffalo mozzarella, and that is just so delicious to me. It's what got pizza off the ground in the first place, I believe. So there's so many options, and to hit on, I know people are going to ask how I do my barbecue pizza. So just real basically, we use Sweet Baby Ray's barbecue sauce in place of any red sauce on the pizza. I'll smoke a chicken breast. My family, sadly, is mostly chicken breast eaters. I like thigh. That's my go-to. But so I'll smoke a chicken breast and chop that up really small, and then we just load it up on there with mozzarella cheese and the barbecue sauce, the cheese, the chicken breast. We'll do red onion, and I'll do half of it with jalapeno peppers, and then we put green bell pepper on the whole thing as well, and it comes out phenomenally well. It's very, very good. So,
well, coming to you next on Pilosophy.
Yeah, no joke.
So, all right. Well, our next question comes from Nicholas Goulet, because I too could talk about this all day, sir. It's like, I'd like to hear your policy around receiving gifts, free stuff, publicity, endorsements, etc. It seems all my favorite homebrew YouTubers and podcasters are using the same equipment manufacturer. I'm sure it's great equipment, but at this point, it's a bit surprising.
So this is a huge question, Nicholas, and I'm glad you asked it. I have no qualms, referring or talking about this stuff, talking about our sponsors and the way these things work. My issue is that I feel like there is a that people have adopted. Some people, not all people, but in modern society, there is this mass adoption of this idea that if you are promoting something, then clearly you're a liar. You're doing it with malice, and just because I didn't get something for quote free, that your opinion is different than mine because I paid for it. Well, just a heads up, nothing in this world is free. If people get something, regardless of whether they're telling you the truth or not about it, and we'll get to that, when you see people promoting a product, that is their payment for that product. And I can't stand when people think that it's free. This takes a lot of work. And in fact, we've got a whole episode planned based on a recommendation, actually multiple recommendations we've received from patrons of ours to do an experience episode on basically this stuff, how Brülosophy operates, the underlying philosophies when it comes to things like product promotion and such. So I'm not going to go too deep into this, Nicholas, but again, nothing is free, first off. Now, when you are going to YouTube or you're hitting the internet and you're noticing, all of these people seem to be promoting the very same thing at the very same time. That is a coincidence. No, it's not. That is very much a plan. And there's nothing wrong with that, in my opinion. Now, you very rarely will see Brülosophy doing that at the same time. Usually, if we agree to take on that product and give it a spin, we're spending at least 6 to 8 weeks with that product, using it actively, coming up with our actual honest opinions on it before we do any sort of promotion of that product. That's just a very personal philosophy of mine. We've had contributors in the past who disagree with that philosophy, who are kind of more in line with some of the other content creators out there, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just something that I developed when I started Brülosophy, and I want to keep that going. We say no to products more than we say yes to them. I've yet to publish something about a product that is, there's that 2 weeks where it's really hot and you're seeing it on every YouTube channel. And I think we've yet to go along with that, again, because we want to make sure that we give it a fair shake before we actually go out and start telling the people that support what we do that we endorse this product. So that's take on that. So nothing is free. I don't know if we've ever received gifts. In fact, yeah, I suppose if you're... Yeah, it's not a gift. If they're flying you out to, Yakima to be a part of their thing, they want you there for a reason. That's not a gift. It's work, really. If we're endorsing something, 100% of the time that we endorse a brewing related sponsor, it's because we've already been using their stuff and we actually love it. All of the sponsors that we currently have, in fact, I think it's every single one we've been working with for years and years, and we actually talk with them. This is not like a thing that's like, under the table, hey, if you promote this, we'll hook you up with this. That doesn't happen. Yes, we occasionally get gear and stuff sent to us in exchange for that level of promotion, but that's not something I'm ashamed to admit. And just because we do that, I'm a cynic, so I can relate with the people who believe, cynically, that the only reason we would do that is because it was quote free. That's just not the case. So we also have openings, we'd be willing to promote stuff that's not brewing related. We had a hot sauce company, in fact, reach out to us, I believe it was a year and a half ago, and say, hey, we love what you're doing. We want to send you some of this hot sauce. And if you like it, we'd love to pay you for advertising for a month. And they did that. This hot sauce is great. I still buy it, actually. And so, that's just the way that we've decided to operate. There is a big push, though. And the reason I mentioned, we say no far more than we say yes. In fact, I can't remember the last time we took on a fresh or brand new sponsor, purely because of the product that they want us to promote. But, yeah, we see the same thing, that you got a lot of YouTubers who are promoting the same thing at the same time. And, honestly, it may very well be from people who are creating an incredible product. For us, though, we're not going to take it on unless we have a need for it, first off, and we actually really do like it. So that's our philosophy. If you're seeing things like Clawhammer Supply, they are coming out with an incredible keg fermenter right now. That is going to be incredible. Chances are you're going to see that on a bunch of channels, in part because Clawhammer Supply is badass, and their way of supporting what we're doing is by helping us out by providing that, and then they get the kickback of some added promotion. And I just don't. There's nothing wrong with that, I get the element of envy. I get that. Like, oh, you didn't have to pay for it. spend one day doing what we do for Brulosophy. Spend one day doing what, the folk, all the other YouTubers are doing to make sure their channel stays around. It is hard work. I don't know how else to send that across, but it takes a lot of time and effort. So it's not that they're receiving these gifts. It's that they've developed an exchange, product for promotion. And I don't personally find anything wrong with that. Will, that was a lot of words there on my part, but what do you think about the whole thing? I know you've been doing this for a little over a year and a half now, I think, with us, but you've been around the scene long enough to have witnessed some of what Nicholas is talking about.
So I don't typically have a problem with it. I kind of take a little bit with you an exception to the word gifts. Like it's not free. It's not just a gift. It's not just that. Like they are expecting some sort of showcase on an article, on a channel, on whatever it is. And again, it is like a perk of doing it, but especially in the case of us and Martin with YouTube, man, the amount of hours that are spent with all those YouTubers with like video production and everything else, like trust me, they're not getting paid near enough. It is a labor of love at some point, because you're just not really getting paid enough by any of this stuff, even endorsements or otherwise, because it is a big time sink. So even what we're doing with the articles and the podcast, there's still a lot that goes into all of this. Like, how many hours does it take to get to an article? It's more than one or two. And don't get me wrong, it's a lot of fun. I love doing it. Otherwise I wouldn't be doing it, but it is work. And there are some times that I'm brewing beer because I need to get some content out there, where I may have taken that weekend off otherwise, but that's okay. That's part of the gig. That's what I signed up for. And that it's awesome. So I'm happy to be on this ride. And the other thing too, we have great sponsors like Imperial and Yakima Valley Hops, to name a couple. And a lot of these sponsors like Imperial and YVH, like I was using before I even became a contributor here. And odds are, if I had to quit for whatever reason and kept brewing, like I would still probably be using Imperial and YVH. They just make really good products and have really, really great products to provide. And so I think we were really good about filtering through a lot of this stuff and only pushing things that we actually believe in and think are a good product.
Yeah, that's a good point as well. I had somebody reach out a while back, and they said, I'm curious why you guys are promoting Imperial Yeast and Yakima Valley Hops and some of these, Jaded Brewing. They're like, these are household names among homebrewers these days. Do they really need the promotion? So they came at it from that angle, and my response was, well, what do you make of that? They want to support us as well, and so people can ask them, why are you supporting Brulosophy? Because that's what this community is about. And I get the concern that you're going to be lied to and that there's going to be some sort of manipulation because of money or whatever that is. If you don't trust us, you're not going to trust us with me saying this, but I rest assured that is not my philosophy. I would not feel right if that were the case. And that's why we say no as often as we do. If you go and you look at brulosophy.com, I think in the last 2 years, we've done 1 or 2 product reviews. We have sponsors these days who are just saying, man, we love what you guys are doing so much and want to make sure that you stick around. Let us know whatever you need. And that sounds like a gift. That sounds like we are not abusing that, are we, Will? I've had people ask me, hey, can I get this from this company? No. We're going to hold off. They just hooked one of us up with a fermenter or something like that. Let's give it some time and give them a little bit of love first. That's just my personal philosophy, and I feel like it keeps us, I don't know, a little bit cleaner. So, but yeah, I do appreciate the question, Nicholas. If you are interested in stuff like that, in us kind of digging into the underbelly of Brulosophy and the homebrewing scene in general, then pay attention to episode 300. There's a lot of questions on that one that have to address this type of stuff, as well as our next episode, our experience episode. We're kind of tentatively planning right now on it being just about what being a part of Brulosophy has been like over the last 9+ years. So, well, we've got to take a quick break. We're going to be right back with more Brü A right after these messages. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com, and be sure to let them know Brulosophy sent you. Family-owned Atlantic Brew Supply is the largest homebrew shop in the Southeast. No gimmicks, no multinational corporate overlords, and no BS. They offer exclusive malts, yeast, and more from local artisans, as well as award-winning recipe kits. They also sell professional brewing gear and cask equipment from sister companies ABS Commercial and Cask Supply. Most ingredients are available by the ounce, plus Atlantic Brew Supply has an on-site calculator to help you craft your best brew. Orders are processed same day, and 2-day shipping is guaranteed for East Coast customers. Get 15% off your first order using promo code BRUPOD. That's BRUPOD at AtlanticBrewSupply.com. Alrighty, time to answer more listener submitted questions. Why don't you go ahead and kick this round off, Will?
So this next question is from Andrew Hoddenfield, and he says, while I was brewing a Vienna lager the other day, extremely hungover, I was adjusting my pH with lactic acid, and the pH of the wort was not coming down. After about 15 minutes of mashing, I considered adding some more lactic acid, and it was then that I realized I used 3 milliliters of Biofine instead of lactic acid in the first adjustment. While I don't think Biofine in the mash at 3 mils will affect the brew at all, it got me wondering what accidents and mistakes have you guys made that either made your batch better or forced you to toss a batch? After all, the whole brewing process seems like one accident after the next.
First off, I don't think Biofine is going to have any impact whatsoever if you add it to your mash, especially 3 milliliters. And so I'm assuming that it didn't really make your batch better or worse there, Andrew. But to answer your question, I've said many times before, I am as neurotic as they come in regards to brewing and most things that I get into. So I pay super close attention to things. So other than like accidentally bumping the valve on my old batch sparge cooler and losing like 2 pints of wort onto my garage floor, I really haven't run into too many issues. There have been 2 that I could think of when Andrew answered this question. One that's arguably not really my fault. That one I believe it was a porter that my buddy Chris and I were going to brew. This was 14 years ago now, I think. And I went to the homebrew shop. This was before I was doing the whole bulk ingredients thing. I went to the homebrew shop, and this shop is cool. You just give them your list of ingredients, and then you can walk around and shop while they go get all the stuff for you. So they go and do that, and it all weighed, measured out properly. And so I take those grains and I go back, and the next morning Chris comes over and we're brewing this wort, and I'm looking and I'm saying, man, that does not look like a porter. It looked more like a red ale. And it was kind of this blush, kind of like pinkish red color. And I'm thinking something is off here. Well, what we found out was that any of the roasted grains, they were just forgotten. And as anybody who's made porter or stout knows, you're not using a ton of roasted grain. So it was easy for the guy to miss. He just forgot to add it in there. But what's interesting about it is it ended up being everything else we did exactly the same. So we hopped it just like we did the porter recipe. Everything was exactly the same, and the beer was surprisingly well received. It wasn't, imagine a porter without the roast. It doesn't make any sense, but it did taste kind of like a malty, slightly higher ABV Irish red ale that wasn't as red because it got all its color just from, a small amount of crystal malt and stuff like that. But it was really quite tasty. So a happy accident, if you will. Would I rebrew that exact beer again? I'm not sure, but I did think it was kind of fun, at least to know that mistake didn't ruin the batch of beer. The other one, which I may have mentioned in a past episode, this is a funny one, and what reminded me of this was Andrew saying that he was brewing a Vienna lager extremely hungover. I started a Vienna lager, in fact, and it was a 10-gallon batch. This was back when I was still brewing on propane, and just as I was mashing in, it's like 10 o'clock in the morning here in Fresno, a bunch of friends of mine said, hey, we want to meet up and have some beers this afternoon, last minute plans, what can we do? I said, well, I'm brewing, so you might as well come over. I had 7 beers on tap at the time. They're all brewers, and so they wanted to bring beers over. So they come over, and by the time they got to my house, I'm just mashing out, right? So I'm collecting my sweet wort into my big old kettle. And I'd had a couple of beers before they got there. As soon as they show up, of course, we start drinking more and more. As the boil's about halfway through, we decide to go inside for something. And an hour and a half later, I remember that there's boiling wort on the freaking burner. And so my friend Sean and I were like, oh, crap, how did we forget? Well, I blame beer. And so we came back out. Now, we'd already made our bittering edition. I think we'd already made our mid-boil edition. This is a Vienna lager. It's not supposed to be extremely bitter or anything like that. So we just kind kind of went with it. The OG was about, I think, 8 points higher than it should have been. So Imperial Vienna Lager, if you will. Fermented it like usual. I think I'd made a starter back then, and it turned out really good. It wasn't any richer than I expected it to be, kind of boozy and really richly malty. But my recollection was that, wow, even boiling it for an extra hour didn't seem to have this detrimental impact. It turned out to be a quite tasty, albeit slightly higher ABV Vienna lager that wasn't any more bitter than it should have been or anything like that. So those are my two mess ups. The only thing I've ever done to actually screw up a beer, and it was partially intentional, is I tried to harvest the yeast from a port brewing IPA at one point, thinking that it was the popular WLP 090 San Diego super yeast. And I did. I harvested the yeast at the bottom of that bottle. I propped it up over the course of a week or two, had a nice big slug of yeast, and when I fermented an IPA with it, it was god awful. And so I reached out to Port Brewing and I asked them, hey, I just did this whole thing. You don't have to tell me any details, but am I way off the mark? And the lady just responded. She's one of their marketing ladies. She goes, I asked the brewers, they bottle condition with a champagne yeast. So you were not fermenting with any sort of ale yeast, which it probably explains the mess up. I did dump that batch. I think there's pictures of me online doing it.
Yeah, so I sort of stopped drinking around brewing because when you do too much of that, you tend to get distracted. And I've forgotten to do things like put the chiller in at the 15-minute mark and had to do it at the last second, like right as flame out was happening, kind of things. So I've kind of like slowed down on the drinking anything while brewing until I get towards the end of the process. But one thing that happened in 2021, San Antonio got covered in snow. And we lost power for like 4 days. And I just happened to brew a quad literally like the day before we lost power. And so fermentation just started kicking up and we lost power for 4 days. That thing was in my garage and it got really cold in my garage. And so I opened it up and saw that fermentation had basically stopped. And I typically add candy syrup or sugar additions into the fermenter. Just so I don't have messy blow-offs quite as bad on my Belgians. But I had 2 pounds of nice D180 candy syrup that I was going to add. And I was like, man, I'm not going to waste this on this beer, but I want to give it a chance. So I actually made a simple syrup from brown sugar because a lot of people use brown sugar in quads. And then tossed in some USO5 because it's what I had on to go with it. And, it's a part of my irrepeatable series of beers because I'll never be able to repeat that recipe ever. But it actually made a really good quad. Not quite as high as ABV because I didn't do 2 pounds of brown sugar, just did a pound. But the next quad I did, because I guess a month later I brewed the quad the way I wanted to, and I was actually able to try them side by side. So the next quad I did a quandary quad where I did a little bit of brown sugar, a little bit of D180, and it was probably one of the better ones I've ever made. So it was a happy little accident that resulted in a really great beer.
That sounds awesome. I've done a few of those where I know I'm just not going to be able to repeat exactly what I did. That's what Tiny Bottom Pale Ale started out as. Thankfully, I took notes while I was making that batch, but the Tiny Bottom Pale Ale recipe I designed that I was like, I've got a little extra of this. I got a little extra of that. Let's put it together to build up a nice big slug of yeast for a double IPA I had planned. And Tiny Bottom was by far better than the double IPA I made, which was still good. But it was just so unique, that blend of like German and English and American hops with an American yeast and just that kind of interesting malt bill. We love it. People to this day still email me and they're like, that's one of the most unique and enjoyable beers that I've made. And it's really simple. It's really easy. So those little happy accidents can be a fun part of brewing. All right. Next question comes from Nico Lane. I was hoping to hear some of your thoughts on Nova lager yeast. Almost everything I brew is fermented under 15 pounds of pressure at 68 degrees Fahrenheit or 20 degrees C, especially if it's a lager. I don't ferment at lager temps because I don't have the equipment to do so. It was your episode on West Coast Pilsner where I was exposed to Nova lager, and I found that it ferments my beer in 2 to 3 days or less, which I've never seen any other yeast do besides maybe Kvike. The thing is, it comes out so clean every single time. I work at a homebrew shop, and it seems this is unspeakable. I almost always have my beer ready to drink in 5 to 9 days, depending on how long it takes to clarify using gelatin. Should I be letting my beer age longer, or should I just be okay with it tasting good and move on? Sometimes I tend to feel that I'm rushing it when really the yeast has finished its job job by day 3? There is so much in this question, Will. I'm really excited to hear what you have to say to Nico.
So I think the quickest beer I've ever turned around was actually a short and shoddy Czech amber that we've talked about in a previous episode. But I think it was grained to glass in like 5 days, and that was booking it. But that beer was delicious. It medaled in a local comp that had like over 500 participants in the comp total. And so I'm actually a fan of quick turnaround beers. I recently listened to an episode of Basic Brewing where they interviewed Alex from Imperial, and he talked about diacetyl specifically. But basically what he was saying is that all yeast produce this. It's just that, like, you know, how healthy is your yeast when you do your diacetyl rest to clean it up? And so kind of a thought from that was like, if you're doing everything pretty warm, it's still producing diacetyl. It's still producing all those other weird flavors that may not be desirable in your finished product. But because it's warm, things like Nova Lager, things like Goebel are able to clean those up very quickly. And so that's kind of one way that I have to explain that. But yeah, at that temperature, probably, 5-day turnaround, 7-day turnaround seems fairly reasonable to me. And while I have yet to use Nova Lager, it is an ale lager yeast hybrid, which is pretty cool. So it's kind of its own class of yeast, so to speak. And if you're making beer and you're happy with it, just keep doing what you're doing. I'm kind of the heretic at my local homebrew club too, where I turn around lagers very quickly. So I mean, some styles like quads, imperial stouts, which we've talked a lot about, yeah, sure, some age is going to help it, but at the end of the day, just brew you, man. You don't have to tell anybody at the homebrew store what you're doing. Just serve them the beer and don't tell them until after they start oohing and on.
Yeah. I agree with you, Will. And I'm going to comment on a few things that Nico said here. First off, thank you for working in a homebrew shop. This is a weird time. We've talked about it in the past, but a weird time for the entire brewing industry and particularly the homebrewing industry. And the fact that you're supporting this whole hobby, I don't know, by being gainfully employed at a homebrew shop, more power to you on that. So thank you for that. Nova Lager is an interesting yeast. Yes, you've heard me have experience drinking beers made with Nova Lager, but I've never used it myself. Just a bit of clarification. Saccharomyces pastorianus yeast strains are a hybrid strain. This is something that we've been aware of for, I think, the last decade or so, maybe even longer than that. But we know that it is a hybrid between Saccharomyces cerevisiae, which is your classic ale strain, your ale yeast, with Saccharomyces eubayanus. And so I believe with Nova Lager, they specifically selected what is ultimately ends up becoming a Saccharomyces pastorianus strain through that breeding process because of its ability to produce low amounts of VDK, diacetyl, as well as almost no hydrogen sulfide or that sulfur smell. That is a big part of the maturation process. There are going to be people out there who disagree with me that something magical happens when you let beer sit for 15 years, whatever. But a big part of the reason that lager beers are aged for as long as they are, or lagered, as it were, for as long as they are, is to give them time so that those off flavors, that sulfur off flavor, that any diacetyl or DMS that might possibly be there, to give them time for that stuff to leave, to get out of the beer, because you don't want it in a lager. Nova Lager yeast was specifically selected because you don't have to let it mature for as long. Now, if you're pairing that with gelatin for clarity, you're going to have a fresher tasting beer. I don't care what that is what freshness is defined as. You get to drink it sooner so that it tastes fresher. If you can get away with doing that and you enjoy the outcome, by all means, keep doing it. If you let it sit for 6 weeks or whatever and you like that better, then do that. If you want pineapple on your pizza, then just do that. Do what works. I do have some comments though. That Nico said that he ferments almost everything under 15 pounds of pressure, especially when it's a lager, at 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Brother, I don't know how else to say this. We have done multiple experiments comparing warm fermented lagers with warm fermented lagers that are fermented under pressure. So the only variable there being pressure. People cannot tell them apart. I don't know where this idea that fermenting under pressure suppresses the development of esters and potentially phenols, but off flavors in general. I don't know where that came from. I don't know if there's some scientific paper out there that proves that that's the case. But on a perceptible level, we cannot replicate that finding if it's out there. We cannot show that fermenting under pressure has any meaningful impact whatsoever. If you want to do it, if you don't mind wasting a little bit of CO2 or whatever it is, then by all means, keep doing it. I just don't know if it matters. Now, there are certain yeast strains, as we've talked about in the past, lager yeast strains that do seem to be a little bit more sensitive to temperature than others. Nova Lager is not one of those, I don't believe. I've had some of those West Coast Pilsners that we reviewed in a past episode, those were fermented warm and they did not taste like what you'd expect from a warm fermented Pilsner. But either have Pilsners or lagers made using these more sensitive yeasts. In fact, we've had people do the triangle test, and then when they get it right, and we're done collecting all of our data, we go to them and tell them what the variable was and have them pick the one they think was fermented cool and the one was fermented warm. And usually the warm fermented one is perceived as being the cleaner one, the more lager-like one. So make of that what you will. We are not promoting a specific method or approach. If you love tradition and you want to keep doing, longer drawn out lager brewing day, that's perfectly fine. Just keep doing it. So that's my take on the pressure fermentation thing, which is where my mind automatically went with this one. Should you be letting your beer age longer? You're as Albert Ellis used to say, you're shitting all over yourself. Do what you want to do, man. I mean, if you like the way that your beers are coming out, just keep doing that. That's my response to pretty much all of these types of questions. They're sentimental in nature, should I do this thing that people have been doing for years? If you want to, sure. But at the end of the day, what matters is that you like the product that you're producing. So.
Yeah, I would add on with the pressure fermentation. Like, I think I like pressure fermentation to save CO2. Yeah, exactly. I'm with you. I don't think it matters at all about flavor or anything else. And maybe there is some scientific article that shows this is the case and it's just not perceptible. But 15 pounds of pressure, that's really great because really you can almost drink, and it won't be totally carbonated when you transfer it after cold crash, but you can drink it and it tastes like beer and it's pretty good. So that would be the one thing I would say about the pressure fermentation component. But yeah, Brü U, man, it's awesome. Make beers that you like.
Amen to that.
So the next question comes from John Stahl of Houston, Texas, just down the road from me. And he says, I have a question for you about attenuation. First, a little context to hopefully frame the question correctly. I've been brewing for a few years, and for the last 2 years, I've been fly sparging. I use distilled or RO water as my source and use Brewfather to calculate the right amounts of salts to put into the mash and sparge water to hit a certain profile. About 6 months ago, I started paying attention to mash pH. Brewfather makes this easy as it gives you a calculated number based on the grain bill and water chemistry right in the software. I noticed if I include all of my brewing salts in the mash, I can drive the mash pH where it needs to be without acid additions, at least when making pale beers. So I've been doing this, and every single one of those beers attenuates further than expected, usually by 5 to 8 specific gravity points. I've used 4 different yeast strains from different manufacturers, and the results are always the same. Why do you think this is happening?
John, no clue, man. I've experienced the same thing in the past. I've also had times though where for me, it's not every single time. It's occasionally that happens. And then other times it doesn't. I don't know. What I think is interesting is that John seems to be going the opposite direction of most brewers, right? Like most start out, or at least in my day, when we got into home brewing back in the day, the reason I avoided, going all grain was because I didn't want to build a fly sparge setup. And then, batch sparge became a thing. And then I moved into, no sparge or full volume, brew in a bag ultimately because it's easier and produces equally as high quality beer. John's going the opposite direction. I wonder if he's like emulating a more of a commercial approach because he's preparing for something. Who knows? But yeah, I don't know. Absolutely, these salts that we buy for brewing with, gypsum, calcium chloride, Epsom salt, all of that stuff will have an impact on your mash pH, and that mash pH can have an impact on attenuation overall. Interestingly, it doesn't seem to have much of a perceptible impact. So even if you're eking out a few more points, yeah, you might have more or less alcohol in the finished beer, but it doesn't seem to have much of an impact on the ultimate, flavor, aroma, and mouthfeel of the beer, at least in our experiments. But I really can't explain why using salts over, say, lactic acid or phosphoric acid would have any impact whatsoever on total attenuation. It's one of those things that just, as not a chemist or a microbiologist, it just stumps me. And, if I over attenuate, I just accept it, drink the beer and move on, I guess.
Yeah. I don't know that I have a good answer here as well. Like I too typically use RO water, and I use Brü to make most of my salt adjustments as far as water chemistry. But I don't typically adjust for mash pH either, and except for when I use my tap water. If I use filtered tap water, our water here comes from an aquifer. It is so alkaline with all the bicarbonate and everything else that I feel like you need to add a little bit of acid just to kind of compensate for that. But I'm not sure if the RO water and the salts are what's driving your attenuation or not. I don't know that it is. If you go look at a lot of my articles over the past year, one common comment that comes up a lot is you over attenuated past this yeast manufacturer spec. Can you explain this? And I can't. I honestly cannot. So I'm glad you put this question on here. So people in the future, I don't have a good explanation. I have experienced this with imperial yeast, other brands of yeast, dry and liquid strains. Over and over again, I've experienced this particular thing, and the only thing I can use to explain it is maybe the quality of yeast has just gotten better. I mean, there is a degree of variability in these products. They put a range for attenuation for a reason, so you can assume that some are go a little over or a little under depending on what's going on there. But I have no idea. But this is an experience that I definitely share with you.
Yeah, I one more comment on this one for you, John, and it's only because of a buddy of mine who had kind of the opposite experience of you. He was under attenuating every batch, and he made like 6 beers, and he'd use his thermometer to make sure that these beers were, they were mashed at 148 degrees, 150 degrees, his standard, and they were finishing at 1018, 1020 FG, and that it was just so frustrating. Well, we're talking about brewing process, kind of like you're asking now. And lo and behold, it ended up being that his thermometer was broken and it was reading 12 degrees Fahrenheit too high. So when he thought he was mashing at 150, he was really mashing at like 162. It was something like that. And so that could be an issue as well. If you're consistently seeing this higher attenuation, it may be that the thermometer you're using to set your mash temperature is just not calibrated or broken or is off. What I wonder is, when was the last time you adjusted a batch with acid versus the salts, and did those ones over attenuate as well? Or are you consistently seeing that when you use acids, it doesn't? If you are consistently seeing a slight over attenuation, I don't think that's anything to worry about personally, but it may very well be something as simple as a temperature measurement issue as opposed to a process issue. So, all right, final question for this episode comes from Jonathan Baker, who says, I recall a show from a while back about yeast where pizza dough came up, and there was some talk about how flavor profile, yeast, etc. gets baked out. I've been making bread for a while longer than I've been making beer, so this piqued my interest. I started my current bread starter from a batch of kettle soured beer I made in my wife's Instapot, and I've kept it going since. I'm good on the bread, focaccia, pizza dough, etc., but I've also been using this to ferment beer. That is fascinating. I get it. It's a bit dirty, but at 1 gallon or about 4 liters, who cares? I always do Weiss beer, usually 50-50 Pilsner malt and pale wheat, though lately I've been adding melanoided malt to varying degrees and drop in roughly 5 grams of the slurry, which is clean but not necessarily sanitary. I'm picky as hell about sanitation, so I've never had a puke smell issue, but it somehow still seems wrong. Does the fermentation do something to inoculate against anything bad? Is the acid in there killing anything that could be nasty? I consistently get 100% attenuation. I only bottle condition, and I've had a mixed bag of results from strong banana and clove to a more sour Hefeweizen, depending on how long the starter has been left to sit and the fermentation temperature. Seriously, WTF. Now, I believe Jonathan is stumped as to how he's able to make these beers using a bread starter that don't turn out complete dumpers, and he's asking for our thoughts on what might explain that. Will?
So first off, I kind of took it because you said he did a soured beer, a kettle sour. So I'm assuming the yeast that fermented out the post-soured acid, beer is probably what he made his starter from. But this is funny because I've done similar stuff with my wife's sourdough starter. And so I've actually made beer with my wife's sourdough starter that she got. It's like a friend who used to live in California got a piece of this sourdough starter and then brought it back and shared it with my wife. I believe they named it Quentin. So we're on Quentin 3 right now because people name their sourdough starters. Apparently it's one of those COVID things that's just stuck around, I guess, with us. But usually the way I would do it is on the day she was feeding it, I would have her give it a little extra, so I'd have a little bit more discard to put aside. And then when I did it, I did just kind of a Berliner Weiss kind of malt bill, a lot of similar to what you're doing, a lot of wheat, a lot of Pilsner malt. And I in my head somehow I thought this sourdough starter, which it's not like a clean 100% bread yeast. In fact, I don't even know what's in it. It's kind of a wild collective of bacteria and whatever else. So I thought it might have like a sourness to it, but it actually made a really clean beer that tasted like a loaf of bread with that malt bill. And I was completely floored about it. And so I did ferment it warm, since bread is usually proofed around 80F or so. But I think it's pretty cool that you're doing it the other way. Now, in your case, I think your banana and clove is very fascinating. I know when we do bread with her starter, if you are using the culture in kind of a stress state, because these are cultures, right? Because they are mixed with Lord knows what's in there. Whatever culture you're using, like when it's stressed, like if we do it when it's too cold or if we let it sit out on the counter too long, I do notice that our bread gets a more sour flavor when it's in that stressed state. Whereas if we do it when it's, kind of at the peak of its reproduction cycle, it creates a really clean bread, which is kind of a fascinating thing for a sourdough starter. But so maybe it's kind of, again, you said with how long, it depends on how long the starter's been left to sit. Well, maybe if you let it sit on the counter for too long and that yeast starts to get stressed, maybe you're going to get more of that sour, more of that banana or clove. And so that's a really cover lever to be able to pull with like a mixed culture, in my opinion.
I think it's awesome. I've never made sourdough bread. I don't have a sourdough starter. So you have more of the experiential side of things here, Will, and I look forward to hearing what your thoughts are to what I have to say about this. To me, if you're getting that kind of Weiss beer, that classic banana and clove characteristic, it just suggests to me that some of the yeast, likely wild yeast, I think that's how sourdough starters are made. Some of that yeast is just POF positive and is going to produce some isoamyl acetate as well. So you're going to get that phenolic and ester driven characteristic. That part makes sense to me. Sourdough is sour, my understanding, is largely because of lactic acid, which is the same stuff that lactobacillus that we're using to make this day and age largely quick sour beers, which have that nice tart sour characteristic. Yes, that acid is going to restrict the growth of certain microflora and whether that's yeast and other bacteria, maybe beer spoilage bacteria. And I also think this is more the psychological side of it, though, but that when we expect something from a specific beer, then when something else is there, we just automatically go and say, well, that's off. So that is an off flavor and that shouldn't be there. But if you're fermenting with a sourdough starter and you produce a beer that happens to have a nice tart note to it, that's almost expected. So it could be that the reason you've had mostly positive results here, Jonathan, is because you're expecting what that sourdough starter is going to do to that beer. So you're already expecting there to be some uniqueness to it, to have this kind of sour characteristic to it. And so it could just be a matter of expectation and that kind of bias that we all possess, right? Whereas if I'm making a Pilsner and it has those characteristics, something clearly got in there that I didn't want in there because that's not supposed to be there. I don't want that there. So I wonder if that's not playing a role as well. But I do think it's really cool that you've been able to same thing with you, Will, that you guys are able to turn around these beers using this really rudimentary method for sustaining one's health. Really, in the old days, that's how people made these breads to make food for sustenance. I think it's really rad.
Yeah, it's kind of a wild thing. That's why I did kind of the Berliner Weiss kind of malt bill at first. But again, I expected sour, and maybe there was a hint of sour on the nose, but for mine it was not sour at all. Again, it tasted like a loaf of bread. I actually had to add some hops in the keg just to make it a little more interesting. Otherwise, I was going to have to dump it because it was just kind of like drinking liquid bread, which isn't a bad thing. It's just not what I expected. Awesome. It's just not what I expected. Do I want 5 gallons of this? Probably not. But I would just say, yeah, play with those levers. Like I think that you're better off if you get it to a very healthy state to producing more, probably cleaner beers. And I don't know exactly. It says a batch of kettle soured beer I made in my wife's Instapot. So I don't know what yeast you used in your kettle soured beer. So if it was a Hefeweizen yeast that you used to kind of as your kettle soured beer that you kind of base this off of, that might be kind of why you're getting some of that clove and stuff as well. But I would say as far as safety, I'm not an expert. but you're still alive, so that's good. But at least I assume you are. If not, my condolences. But just look out for mold, and pH measurements are a good thing because, like you said, the acidity of beer is part of what keeps some of those microbes at bay.
Yeah. And
so if you're having a pH of around 5 or 6, then that may be kind of a warning sign that this could be allowing some really interesting things in there. But if you're going on the sour side, then that's probably a good sign that you're pushing it down below that 4 pH mark and getting into the sour side of things. But, and so if it is high, though, that could be problematic, probably a good sign. Your pH meter is your friend. But I think this is awesome. I love kind of using that mixed firm stuff. I'm not as into it as the guys at Milk the Funk and some of those other places are, but they may be a really good resource especially if you're doing this intentionally. They don't like spontaneous fermentation questions necessarily, but if you're doing this intentionally, they're usually pretty cool guys. And I've always wanted to find like a grad student somewhere that could like dissect our mixed culture and tell us what's in there. And so if you find that hookup, please send me an email.
Yeah. One thing that I find really interesting about Jonathan's comment here, I just reread what he said, that he said he used his current bread starter came from a batch of kettle sour beer he made. Now, I've never made a bread starter, but I've watched a lot of YouTube videos on it. That's part of the reason I've not done it. I just don't have the time right now to kind of baby one of these things. But if I'm reading this correctly, or is this even possible that he made the beer and then he used the slurry from that to start his bread starter? I mean, that's a thing, right?
That's what I'm reading, and it kind of makes sense because we know that bread yeast is still a Sac Cerevisiae strain. In fact, we've done experiments at Brulosophy comparing like regular bread yeast with brewer's yeast. And so like, it makes sense to me that you could just take that as well. But the fact that he keeps feeding it similar to a sourdough starter, no telling what other fun things get to latch on in there and create this kind of like mixed culture fermentation. And whether you're thinking about bread or beer, it's all fermentation at the end of the day.
Well, I have a proposal as somebody who's on the Brew Club leadership, Will, for an average brew. I think it'd be really cool if people did an average brew like bread instead of a beer, and then everybody just sends us their homemade bread because I love a good sourdough bread. Well, that is all the time that we've got for this episode, our 29th Brü A. Thanks again to everybody who submitted questions. We always love answering them. If there's anything at all that you'd like for us to address in a future Brü A episode, please do send your questions to feedback@brulosophy.com. Just make sure to indicate that it's for Brü A in the subject line so we can easily filter it out and get those questions added to our list. As mentioned earlier, we're going to be back with another Brü A in just a couple of weeks, focusing solely on questions submitted by our patrons. And we've got so many questions submitted, we are going to have to parse them out. And you can add your question to that list by visiting patreon.com/Brulosophy and becoming a patron of Brulosophy, helping us to keep doing what we're doing. Will, do you have any final words before we wrap this one up?
No, just thanks for all the really great questions. Thanks for all your support. And remember to go to patreon.com and become patrons of Brulosophy if you enjoy what we do.
That's right. Well, don't forget to check out the Brew Lab podcast, where host Cade Job takes you into the lab with brewing professionals to discuss the fascinating work they've done on our favorite beverage, as well as the Brulosophy Show at youtube.com/@thebrulosophy show, where Martin is producing some truly incredible content. Also, make sure to head to brulosophy.com to read up on all of the fun beer and brewing stuff we're up to. The Brulosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brulosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brulosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brulosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it suits my bro. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman, no.